Hey, and welcome to this episode of Top 5 The Weird and Mysterious. If you're new to this channel, welcome. We cover a lot of different things here, so definitely check out my other different shows as I do several live shows a week. So make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to set for all notifications. Today, we're going to be taking a look into the top 5 most compelling UFO encounters, and we are going to be covering obviously the best ones. And for my regular viewers and listeners, you probably know which one of them will be. But if you are new to this channel, you are in for a treat. Before we get started, I would like to say hello to people in the live chat: Zenza, Zoltan, Wood, Jessica, Tyler. Welcome, everyone. John aside and Neurostream, thank you so much for the super sticker. While we are reading these top 5, let me know in the live chat, let me know in the comments which cases that you think we're going to be covering today. So let's start off with our first one. I'm going to share my screen here as a visual aid while I read you the number 1 on the list. And that is the Maury Island incident that took place on June 21st, 1947. Huh. That's an interesting date. 1947. When you think of that date, you think of Roswell, right? Well, this actually happened 2 weeks before Roswell. Interesting. So on June 21st, 1947, off the coast of Maury Island in South Puget Sound, Washington, a man named Harold Dahl was out on his boat with his son Christopher, their dog, and 2 hired ship workers. Harold and his son collected logs floating in the sound and resold them to lumber mills. Now, according to Mr. Dahl, on June 21st at 2 p.m., 6 unidentified flying objects that were in the shape of a donut appeared in the sky above his boat. One of the saucers began wobbling as if it was having some kind of problem, and then an explosion occurred in the middle of it, and a kind of hot molten metal substance started raining down from the sky, landing in the water and on the boat, causing damage not only to the vessel, but also killing the family dog and breaking Christopher's arm, Harold's son. After the donut shaped craft excreted the substance, it was no longer wobbling and caught up with the 5 other craft. Dahl stated that he didn't see any motors and there wasn't any propulsion. He didn't even hear anything. And he gauged it was about 100 feet in diameter with a hole of 25 feet in diameter, which is a really interesting detail. And when I've looked at other cases, a donut shaped craft is kind of rare. I think so. But in all of the cases that we cover regarding UFOs, there's never propulsion seen. There's usually the majority of the time you don't hear a sound from these craft. Sometimes you do, like a nice humming sound, but for the most part you do not. And that is what's interesting about this case. So Dahl judged that at least 20 tons of the debris had fallen into the water and on the beach of Maury Island. It was a kind of dark stone, lava like, with metallic properties. Now, if we think back to our primitive technology, sometimes planes can dump oil and fuel, right, to lighten the load. But have you ever heard of a UFO doing that? Severshot, thank you so much for supporting the channel. This story gets more wild. Not only is this sighting weird, but it's what happens to Harold after the encounter. So, as soon as this happens, the vessel is damaged. He has to tell his superior captain what happened, obviously, right? And he didn't tell anybody else that day. But the very next day, a man in a suit knocks on Mr. Dull's house and asked him to tell him everything that happened the day before. So, as Harold is telling the story to this man in a suit, or as what we would call the men in black, he stated that you can't tell anyone else this story. And if you dare tell another soul, bad things are going to happen to you in your life. Well, Harold and like the majority of people, they did not heed this warning. They're like, I'm going to tell whoever the heck I want about my encounter. It happened to me. But bad things did end up happening to him in his life. And we're going to get into that a little bit later. So then on August 1st, 1947, 40 days after the incident, Harold was seen by two military officers and asked to give the agents the debris that Harold collected. And like any wise person, if something crazy like that happens to you, of course you're going to collect the debris. And he did exactly that. Here's the thing, he didn't tell anybody about that though. I think except for the man in black. So, how were the military officials aware of his possession of this material? Well, we don't have information to that little tidbit. So these men collect his debris and all of the debris around the beach as well, and they place it on their B 52 bomber. Here is that image as a visual aid. So, this plane was thoroughly inspected 2 weeks before this date, but several minutes after liftoff, it crashed in Kelso, Washington. Two of the pilots died, and two people left with a parachute. It is believed that it was an internal fire that caused the crash, but some researchers believe that the box of debris collected from Harold was what caused the plane to crash. What do you think about that? Well, after the plane went downhill from there, there were 300 search and rescue people looking for the crash and the people that didn't have a parachute. But then in the Colsonia Tribune newspaper in August of 1947, it stated that the close guard which Army officers established around the crash scene and their refusal to permit any pictures to be taken of the wreckage added to the belief that the plane was carrying secret cargo. This is interesting because this newspaper was also documenting on this as well. So, this is a very unique little detail to add. But as I had mentioned, Harold did encounter some bad things in his life after this situation. His son went missing for a short period of time, his business was vandalized, he got some mysterious illness, and he was publicly ridiculed after coming out about this case. Here's another visual aid. So later on, he, after all this happened, after all this ridicule, after all these terrible things happening in his life, he comes out to the public and he says, I made the whole story up. I am an absolute liar. None of this actually happened to me. We've seen this before, and that was with Jesse Marcel in Roswell, which took place 2 weeks after this case. But when we're looking at the material that was supposedly on the B 52 bomber, were the remains really taken on a B 52? I don't think so. What do you think about that? Do you think it would be public information that this potentially extraterrestrial technology would be on a B-52? Because B-52s, they weren't designed back then. So that's a interesting detail that it's in all of these documentations of this story. What do you think about this? Those watching this live, those watching and listening to this on a rerun, let me know in the comments or take a moment to think about it. But for those that are watching this live, I would like to hear your thoughts. James, thank you so much. Socorro for the win, RV Fund. Thank you so much, James. Do appreciate that. Jessica says, I believe everything happens for a reason, either good or bad. Interesting. Well, I think that's possible for sure. Well, in all of this, it makes you take a step back. Did this story really happen or not? Well, regardless on if it did or didn't, the island, Maury Island in Washington, is very proud about this to the point where they have a mural, as you can see right here on YouTube, that is right next to the area. Along with, they also have a festival that they do every single year. Here's one of those floats that you can see right here, which is really exciting. And last year was their 75th anniversary. Now, this picture was taken back in 2013 during their festival, but it goes to show that it's a very impressionable case. So I find that incredibly interesting. All right. And looking at this case, hold on. It looks like while the B-52 wasn't created yet, the B-25 was. And it's potentially the reason to why that might have been written down. But from the cases that I read, it said the B-52 instead of the B-25. So maybe the person that was writing it had dyslexia, such as myself, and I totally get that. But I do appreciate all of you in the live chat being on the ball and correcting me on that. Thank you so much. Moving on to our next case, and we are doing so bomb. But this encounter isn't just a one instance, it's not just one date, but it's actually a person. And we're going to be talking about Gordon Cooper. How many of you are familiar with him? I'm going to share my screen here of him. But in 1963, Gordon Cooper was on a solo mission to fly the longest and last Mercury space flight, Mercury Atlas 9, which lasted 22 days. During his final orbit, he reported seeing a glowing greenish object approaching his capsule, which was picked up on radar at a tracking station in Australia. So if the tracking radar was able to monitor this UFO, goes to show that it was a solid object. Cooper's sighting was reported by the National Broadcast Company, which was covering the flight step by step. But when Cooper landed, reporters were told that they were not to be allowed to question him about the UFO sighting. But he's claimed that he's had multiple UFO sightings. Back in 1951, he sighted a UFO while piloting an F-86 Saberjet over Western Germany. They were metallic, saucer shaped discs at considerable altitudes and could outmaneuver all American fighter planes. Cooper also testified before the United Nations, stating, I believe that these extraterrestrial vehicles and their crew are visiting this planet from other planets. Most astronauts were reluctant to discuss UFOs. I did have an occasion in 1951 to have 2 days of observation of many flights of them of different sizes flying in fighter formation, generally from east to west over Europe. But he's even had more sightings. Stargazer says, I believe what Cooper said, and he made his accounts very public. He said things on television, he said things to the United Nations, he did certain interviews with people where he tells his stories. But why doesn't the majority of the public remember this? Well, for those that are new to this topic, that aren't familiar with this story, don't worry, we are going to get into other things that he had stated publicly. E Bravo says astronauts and Navy pilots can't be trusted with their eyes, laughing face. You're absolutely and I see the joke in that, because they are trained to know everything that they're seeing. Well, not say everything, but the majority of things. This is what they're trained to do. So when they say that they see a UFO, it's not going to be a weather balloon. It's not going to be some enemy plane or enemy technology, probably not. It's going to be something that is unexplainable to their trained eye. So in 1957, he saw a strange looking saucer like aircraft that made no sound while landing or taking off at a dry lake bed near Edwards Air Force Base. He also claimed that the object at Edwards was seen by other personnel and had landed on a tripod like landing gear. While he filed a report about this sighting at the Edwards Air Force Base, the Pentagon confiscated the photographs he had taken, preventing them from being publicized. He also stated that although astronauts and military pilots frequently saw UFOs, they were discouraged from reporting them, and that they were constant efforts to keep word of strange sightings in the sky from reaching the public. So here we are hearing it again from someone like an astronaut or those that are in the Navy, that I can name a few, stating that they are seeing these on a frequent basis. We've heard that ever since after 2017, where we're having military personnel, very specifically Navy pilots, coming out stating, yeah, we're seeing this every day. But this is nothing new. Gordon Cooper also made mention of this. And he believes that these extraterrestrial vehicles and their crew were visiting Earth from other planets. And the reason for the secrecy was to avoid causing panic among the public. He wrote about his experiences and conspiracy theories in his autobiography, Leap of Faith. He stated in an interview, we never could get close enough to pin them down. He's referring to the UFOs, but they were round in shape and very metallic looking. During this period, Cooper was a project manager at Edwards Air Force Base just 3 or 4 years before entering America's space program. After lunch this particular day, Cooper had assigned a team of photographers to an area of the vast, dry lake beds near Edwards. So, in a taped interview with ufologist Lee Spiegel, he's on KUNX Talk Radio, guys, the former astronaut disclosed that while the crew was out there, they spotted a strange looking craft above the lake bed and they began taking films of it, which is so smart. Cooper says that the object was very definitely hovering above the ground, and then it slowly came down. It sat on the lake bed for a few minutes, and then it left. But this was all happening while the cameras were filming this instance. So there were varied estimates by the crewmen on what the actual size of the object was, but Cooper confesses that they all agreed that it was at least the size of a vehicle that would carry normal sized people in it. Cooper was not fortunate enough to actually be outside at the time of this incredible encounter, but he did see the film as soon as they were rushed through the development process. And he watched it dozens and dozens of times, which I would too if I was seeing something like that myself. but he stated that it was a typical circular shaped UFO, and not too many people saw it, as he said, but because it took off at quite a sharp angle and just climbed straight out of sight. But after he had seen these videos, it was very quickly confiscated and sent to Washington. So he expected to, in a few weeks, to hear from the from those that had taken this to see kind of like what's the next step. But turns out the movie just vanished. The photographs vanished and it never surfaced again. But here is where it gets wild. On Coast to Coast television, Cooper made a blockbuster statement and had the telephone lines tied up the next day as viewers telephoned the station, which carried the synchronized Merv Griffin show, anxious to find out if their ears had been playing tricks on them the night before. So, towards the end of the talk show host's interview with the former astronaut, Merv broke into a secretive tone of voice right on the air and aimed a $100,000 question at his guest, stating this: there's a story going around, Gordon, that a spaceship did land in Middle America and there were occupants, and members of our government were able to keep one of the occupants alive for a period of time. They've seen the metal of the aircraft and they know that the people look like. Is this a credible story? Now, for all intents and purposes, Cooper should have laughed for a surety to think that this is such a crazy story that belongs in science fiction or space fantasy. But Gordon Cooper kept a very straight face when he replied, I think it's fairly credible. I would like to see the time when all qualified people could really work together to properly investigate these stories and either refute or prove them. So that was it. The bombshell was dropped. He dropped some really interesting information. Even though he didn't say much, he didn't laugh at the question. Instead, he's like, it's fairly credible. I don't know. I need some more information. I need some more evidence, but I don't see why not. And coming from an astronaut with the background that he has, that's a really big deal. I think it's incredibly impressive. And then soon after, his phone couldn't stop ringing. He had a private secretary at the time, and she was swamped as well. But he did give a short interview with Lee Spiegel stating, Lee stated that Cooper admitted to me that he could have revealed more on the air, but he decided not to play his entire hand because he felt certain that some official eyebrows were going to get raised. So that is very, very interesting. But now we are going to get into one of my favorite cases. And once again, if you are a regular viewer and listener, you know exactly what case I'm going to cover. And that is Colares, Brazil, because in my opinion, this is one of the most compelling stories I have ever come across in my research. So I'm going to share my screen here while we get into it. I'm going to just drink some water first. I agree. It's totally fascinating. Joel says yes. I'm getting some good feedback. You guys like this story. It is by far my favorite story. And this takes place in Colares, Brazil in 1977. What's so unique about this story is not only was it a UFO flap, meaning it happened every single day for 6 months, but also people were injured during this instance. And that's why it's such a very interesting case. to where a lot of this information is now publicly available through FOIA, thanks to A.J. Javard, who has just passed, but he was an incredible Brazilian ufologist who brought this case to light. So, with this case, there were multiple different shaped craft, saucer shaped, cigar shaped, barrel shaped, and from the witness testimonies, where a lot of them have been released through FOIA, and we're going to get into that, they were completely silent, while others made a buzzing sound or a hum similar to an air conditioner. In the first case, I mentioned that for the most part, from the cases that I've covered, UFOs are pretty quiet. The people that have encountered UFOs, they're pretty quiet. It is rare, and I'm not saying incredibly rare, but it's more on the rare side that they make a little bit of a noise to it. In this case, some were silent, some making a buzzing sound, and some making a sound similar to an air conditioner. And not only were they seeing these craft, but they were also seeing them flash different colored lights, such as red, green, and yellow. Were these flashing of lights related to signaling of some kind, or are the lights just random? We're not too sure about that, but people were left with burn marks from the light. So the light would shine down on these locals and it would cause a slight type of radiation burn, but also puncture wounds as well. Here is a newspaper clipping of the instant of the situation with one of the most famous pictures that you can find in regards to this case. And it is of a woman in the clinic where the doctor is looking at her puncture wounds. There were many people across this town that had these puncture wounds, for women in the chest area, for men in the jugular or in the throat area. Of course, there were some instances where it was in the thighs and kind of in like the stomach ish area, but for the most part, it was in the chest and the jugular area. Now, these people that would have these lights shined on them, they would be completely paralyzed. They would not be able to move. And it was getting so severe, it was getting so scary for the people that they ended up calling these lights, nicknaming it Chupa Chupa, which literally means sucker, sucker. And because they were so scared, they tried shooting at these lights themselves, and that didn't stop these encounters. They began to walk in groups. They would never walk alone, thinking that that could potentially protect them from these lights. And that didn't work because these beams of light from the witness testimonies would shine through the walls, through the doors, through the roof. You weren't safe, and people were mortified. So much so that this was classified as a violent attack. And actually, in September, two people came to the clinic as if they had cardiac arrest. And of those two, both of them died. Now, in all the cases that I've covered, I have never encountered a case where someone had a UFO sighting or a close encounter and died from it. In this case, it seems like that happened, but it was getting so out of hand. It was getting so scary that the mayor called the capital, Brasilia, and he said, please bring the military to my town. Please protect them. And the military said, yeah, sure, we'll be there pretty shortly. And it ended up becoming Operação Plato, or Operation Saucer. And the locals thought they were going to bring weapons, guns, cannons, tanks, whatever they could bring. But it turns out that they just brought papers, pencils, telescopes, and some cameras as well. So That is, it was unnerving for them, and they were also interviewing witnesses as well of the things that they encountered. They were doing drawings of the craft that were seen, and it just makes you question, why didn't they bring weapons? Why didn't they do any of that stuff? Instead, they already knew that they had to bring research equipment, more so than your typical equipment that you would have if you were part of the military. Now, Dr. Calvello, a, a doctor in the only clinic that was in the area, examined many of these patients that were affected by the light. And she stated that she was getting irritated because she really believed at first that these people were suffering from mass hysteria, since she herself had not seen any of these bright lights, hadn't seen any of these UFOs or anything like that, until she did. Then everything changed. But in September, she got a patient that was carried in by her family, and she was incredibly stiff, jaw locked, eyes shut. She couldn't be folded, and she was spazzing as if going through cardiac arrest. And since there was only a clinic in Colares, there was no hospital, the woman actually had to be sent to a hospital in the nearby town to be treated. But then, soon after, another woman comes into the clinic with very similar symptoms, and she too is asked to go into the hospital. But here's the crazy thing about that: they both passed away soon after. When the doctor asked for the records of how these two women passed, she wasn't able to receive them. They became unclassified documents. She wasn't able to touch them. And it makes you question, what's going on? The only explanation that she got was that they died of cardiac arrest. And that's it. Okay, that's understandable. But she was never actually given the paperwork of any of this. It was only kind of through like a little note. Oh, well, that's all you get. And the paperwork was classified. It irritated her. Now, when the military came to speak to the only doctor in the town, they told her that you're going to tell everyone that they have mass hysteria. That's it. That's all you're going to say. And at this point, she's like, how can I put my credibility on the line? I have been, I have had my own encounter. I have dealt with so many patients now. It's not mass hysteria. There's no way. And so she did not do what the military told them and still tried to treat the patients the best that she could. But so far, there's so much to this case and all the cases that we're covering, and we only have a short time to cover so many. But I would like to ask, what do you think about this case so far? Do you find it compelling? And you can find a lot of this information on the Black Vault website, which is super cool, where I got a lot of my information from. Interesting. Absolutely right. Well, after the military come, they talked to the doctor, and then they were only there for a few months, and they were very quickly called back to the capital. And they said, okay, we don't need you to do any more investigations. But then it wasn't until 1997 where Captain Urange Lima spoke to UFO Magazine, run by AJ Javard and another, where he finally tells his story of what happened back in 1977. At this point, he was already retired, so he didn't really have too much to lose. And there he goes in depth, talking about how his men were scared, how his men had encounters, how he had encounters seeing craft in the sky. but he also had a close encounter. He stated that one night he was visited by a humanoid from a ship while in bed. There was a powerful flash, and there was a being behind him hugging him. The alien was believed to be about 1.5 meters tall, wearing a spacesuit. It was kind of soft and not too tight, and was wearing a mask that was lead gray. And it didn't see, you weren't able to see its eyes or the shape too well. In this interview that Urange Lima gave back in 1997, he did this drawing depicting of how he remembers this alien to look. And this extraterrestrial also spoke to the captain, and he was frightened, and the thing behind him was hugging and squeezing him and stating in Portuguese that almost sounded like a metallic, like a metallic type accent, kind of like a robot stating, "Take it easy, we're not going to do you any harm." And then it left. In that interview, Urange Lima shows a piece of his arm of this little protruding item, and he believes that he was implanted by something from this extraterrestrial, but X-rays can't see it, but you can actually see it through the skin. 3 months after giving this interview to UFO magazine, Captain Urange Lima was found dead in his home after he seemingly hung himself using the belt of his bathrobe. It is said that Lima had a history of mental illness and had tried to kill himself before. But is that true? Because when AJ and others asked those around him if he had any suicidal thoughts or any types of depression, they told AJ no, he absolutely loved life. There was no way he would do something like that. Now, looking from the debunkers' side of this story, debunkers said that it was bats that were the the villain to this whole story, stating that they were bite wounds and that was it. But with the people that had these encounters during this case, there was no blood around those wounds. And if it was a bat, you would hear the flapping of the wings, you would hear them making their bat noises. You would know if it was a bat. So this is an interesting case that the debunkers kind of leaned towards. So that's a bit odd. Now there are books that go into detail interviewing a few of the witnesses. You can find many pieces, not all, not everything was released relating to Operation Saucer, but a handful of it was released through FOIA that you can find at the Black Vault. And there you can kind of look more into it because it's an absolutely fascinating case. But looking at the what the debunker said about bats, like why bat attacks only happen in that year in that area, but it was never again. Like it never again happened. Only that one time for those 6 months back in 1977. It makes you question, what are these debunkers thinking? It's totally okay to be a skeptic, to ask questions and to get as much evidence as you can. But when you're a debunker, you don't care what the evidence is. You already have a narrative that you have to go with. You're right, Eve Bravo. Bats don't shine lights through walls. At least I hope not. That'd be kind of crazy. But it's one of those stories, one of those cases that you do need to look at the debunker's side. Like with any case that you cover regarding UFOs, it's good to look at all of the aspects so that you know how to conduct your argument. But this one, it's still one of my absolute just my favorite case, and I want to go into more detail, but we don't have enough time. So we're going to continue with our next case. And this one is with Alan Godfrey. This one takes place in West Yorkshire in the United Kingdom. So we're doing cases from all over the world. The United States, Brazil, the UK. We got it all here. I'm going to share my screen here of a drawing that Alan did when he had his sighting. So, on a wet road in West Yorkshire early in the morning of November 28th, 1980, a policeman coming to the end of his night shift received a report from Todmorden, a small market town in Calder Valley, where people were complaining that a herd of cows had escaped from a field and were wandering around their gardens. The officer in question was P.C. Allen Godfrey, then a 33-year-old married father of two, based at Todnick, and he set off to take a look. And as he was driving at 5:15 a.m., he saw what he thought was a broken down bus blocking the road. Only it wasn't a bus. He stated, as I inched closer, driving at a crawl, I saw a diamond shaped object about 20 feet wide and 14 feet high, literally hanging in the air about 5 feet off the road. It was spinning slowly, and the leaves on the road underneath were spinning in the opposite direction. It looked very real, real enough that if I had got out of my car and thrown a brick at it, it would have made a clang. Instead of getting out of the car, however, Alan turned on his blue light and tried to call in the incident. Yet, curiously, neither his car radio nor his personal set was working. Then, as he stated, my police's instincts kicked in and I decided to draw a sketch, such as we are seeing here, just as I would if I came across a road traffic accident to show the positions of the vehicles involved. There was then a brilliant white blinding flash, a bit like having your photograph taken when the flash gun in your face. And the next thing he remembers that he was driving, stunned, in the opposite direction, back towards the police station, having lost several minutes of time. Now, the object had vanished, but the patch of road surface was totally bone dry. He states it was a factual event, it was real. And after so many years later, his story has not changed. But this encounter that he had, it nearly ruined his life because he was ridiculed and he was harassed out of his job that he totally loved. He slumped into alcoholism and his marriage broke up. But this location, Toadmorden, has its own unique history concerning otherworldly matters, to the point where it's now called UFO Valley, right between Yorkshire and Lancashire. So after this story went viral, Alan was sent to receive a letter from a professor at Moscow University asking for more information about his encounter. But this was in the middle of the Cold War, and the USSR would have been very interested in unexplained aircraft looking for military secrets. So Alan handed everything over to his superiors, which is totally valid. And we are looking at an image here of what he looked like during this time frame. So after he hands over the paperwork, he's already getting kind of well known for what happened to him. And on the day that he was called into the inspector's office, and sitting there was a man in civil clothing who simply introduced himself as the man from the ministry, which is very interesting. So he had a file on his lap, which, when it flipped open, Alan stated that he could see pieces containing his drawings from the night and also the sudden death of Zygmunt Adamski 5 months before his encounter, Why am I breaking this up? Well, there are many that believe that there is a correlation between the two. Let me go ahead and tell you about this case. So, Ziggy Adamski, a 56-year-old miner of Polish descent, had gone missing from his home near Wakefield on June 6th, 1980, after he nipped out to the local shop to buy some potatoes. 5 months after Allen's encounter, he was called in to look at Adamski's body. It was discovered 20 miles away at a coal yard in Todmorden. And he was found lying on top of a 15-foot coal pile, wearing a suit but no shirt. And there were burn marks on the crown of his head and also wounds at the back of his neck as well. Here is a kind of dark image of what it looked like during that time. So Alan Godfrey investigated this case, and he stated that the oddest thing was that there was no coal dust or dirt on his body. He looked as though he'd simply lied down and died on top of the pile of coal, having no sign of how he got up there. Because this, as he had mentioned, was a 15-foot tall pile of coal. So as you are going up that hill, right? That pile, you are going to get dirty. He didn't look dirty at all. So it was as if he was dropped from above. So, I mean, and think about this. How hard could it be to climb a pile of coal? Think about when you were a kid and you climbed a pile of sand. That was pretty difficult, right? And then if you've ever like climbed over like a mound of rocks, that's not easy either. So imagine coal. And your shoes, your pants, your hands, your face, it would just be black from that coal. But in this case, for Adamski, that wasn't the case. And this kind of reminds me of the story of mutilated cattle being found as if they had been dropped onto the ground as well. Interesting. So, Godfrey stated that his clothes to me suggested that he'd been hastily redressed after death, but it was the look on his face that shocked me the most. I'll never forget it. He looked like he had been scared to death. James Turnbull, the person that was looking at the body after it passed, right? The dead body, stated that this man was missing for 5 days and yet had only a 1 day's growth of beard. There was also a corrosive liquid found around the site of the neck, which couldn't be identified. He also stated that some of the burns had been treated with a strange ointment that could also not be identified by forensic scientists. DIY Craft Q, thank you so much for supporting the channel and the RV fund. Thank you so much. So a post-mortem examination concluded that Adamski had died of heart failure. But the question is, how? Well, there isn't really too much on that, really. But the weirdest thing about this case is that there was no evidence of him being dirty from the coal. He was just dropped. Thank you so much, Amy. So, speaking to reporters, Godfrey said that there was a possibility that Adamski had been abducted by aliens. And he stated, I'm open minded. I can't rule it out. And that's why there's a potential connection between Godfrey's encounter and Adamski. Did they encounter the same craft? Did they encounter the same entities? We don't know, obviously, because we can't interview Adamski since he has passed on what he saw. But this was only in a 4-month period. You had Godfrey's encounter, and then you had Adamski's encounter in this very sleepy town. This is not a big place. It's a very small location, but yet you're seeing two people that had really strange experiences in a very short time frame. A little bit later, under hypnosis, Godfrey recalled that he had been blinded by the light and passed out. He told the hypnosis that when he awoke, he was in a strange room being examined by several little creatures and a tall humanoid figure with a beard. That's an interesting one. Again, his claims were met with raised eyebrows and a lot of question like, are you sure that's what you encountered? But he says, yes, it was. 4 years after, he resigns from the police force and he then worked as a butcher, then for a security agency. But he started to drink very heavily because the reason to why he walked away from the job that he loved was that he was being just ridiculed for his encounter. And he states that he was drinking about a bottle of whiskey a day. His marriage broke up in 1988, and it just kind of went from bad to worse for him. And then in the early 1990s, he was at rock bottom. He stated, I ended up living in a friend's bedroom. I lost everything. I had no money. I parted from my first wife. It was Christmas and I couldn't buy the kids anything. I remember lying down on the floor thinking there was no point in carrying on. Then he states, then suddenly, right, enough is enough. Get a grip, you daft bugger. And that's what I did. I got myself a flat, met my new wife, and she sorted me out. Well, as that happened, he wrote his own book, and now he drives a car with UFO on the license plate. But it seems that with people that have UFO encounters where they are the center of attention and they are being ridiculed, it really messes up their life. And back in those times, coming out about your UFO sighting or interest was risky for your way of life. But, times have changed though, right? Do you all think so? Do you think times have changed since the 1980s, 1990s, where you can publicly talk about this and not be ridiculed? Let me know in the live chat. Let me know in the comments. Yes or no? Poogacher says UFO license plate goals. Totally agree. But he turned a very negative experience into a positive one where now he is proud of his encounter. He's been on television. I believe he's having a movie created about his story. He's written a book. He's happy about it now. But for so many years, it was a terrible fact regarding his life. What a story, right? Kurt says, yes, I think today. Oh, no, no, today has not changed. E Bravo says, not yet. Gran says, depends where you live. Totally valid. I agree. Sever says, ridicule is everywhere. Marty says, it's definitely gotten better to discuss more openly. Mark says, the ridicule factor still exists. I agree, but I think at the same time, with these conversations that we have with so many documentaries that are out, and books, and researchers, and shows that cover the UFO phenomenon, it's become a lot easier to talk about, but there's still a lot of people that have had encounters that have kept it under wraps, that simply do not want to talk about it. And at the same time, I don't necessarily blame them. It's still a very complex topic. And while we are covering some of the most compelling stories, a lot of people might just see something strange in the sky, but that's enough for them to have their lives change. Well, we have one more case for our top 5. Take a guess on what you think it might be right before I read it. What do you think the next case is? It's a pretty compelling one. Let me pull up an image here. All right. Here we go. We're going to talk about the Allagash alien abduction that took place on August 20th, 1976. So, four men from Massachusetts College of Art and Design, brothers Jack and Jim Weiner and their friends Chuck Rack and Charlie Foltz, went on a camping trip for 2 weeks in Allagash Wilderness in Maine. And the first night went great, but it kind of just got weird after that. On the second night, Jim noticed a strange bright object in the sky that appeared for about 30 seconds and then vanished. He saw this and he kind of just brushed it off. He's like, I didn't see anything. Everything is fine. But then, 2 nights later, on August 20th, the men were fishing in a boat when a bright object appeared again. Now, Chuck was the first to notice the object, but it was so close that Jim Weiner says that he could have grabbed a stone and throw it right at the craft. It was that close. But when he tried, to let it quickly flew away. Well, at least, kind of. After they noticed this craft, Charlie tried to signal SOS to the object. And see, that's where the mistake is. If you don't want to get help or abducted, you don't want to sign SOS. So suddenly, the object shot out a bright light and then began following the men along the water. The men frantically began to paddle back to shore, but they noticed that what was once a very glowing bonfire that they had created right on the shore was now totally just smoke and ashes. And they're looking at each other and they're stating, you're only gone for a few minutes. But based off what we're seeing about this fire that we made, it's like we've been gone for a few hours. But I don't remember anything. Do you? No, I don't remember anything. What would happen? Well, they just kind of brushed it off. They're like, well, if you don't remember, nothing happened. Everything is a okay. But it wasn't. It was not a okay. They spent the rest of their time there doing their camping activities that they had planned to do, and they kind of left it at that. They told a few family members about the sighting that they had, but no one really believed them. And they just remember having a sighting. But then 12 years later, in 1988, Jack and Jim began having very strange nightmares. They stated, I was starting to have nightmares, really terrible nightmares that I could not explain. I found myself in a very brightly lit room. I had no idea where I was or why I was there. To my left, I could see my brother Jim, Chuck Rack, and Charlie Holtz sitting on the same type of bench, and they were all naked. I was wondering why they weren't helping me because I felt like I was in danger. And while I'm trying to figure this out, I notice a figure or a dark, shadowy type figure emerging from this light, this bright light in front of me. I would wake up, sweating and breathing heavily and just in a state of terror and shock. His brother was having the exact same dream, and they were seeing something like this. So Jim decided to contact UFO researcher Jay Howler in order to help with the strange nightmares that they're having. And the UFO researcher stated, you know what? I recommend that you go under hypnosis to see what's going on. So the four men agreed and they're like, all right, let's go ahead and do it. And each described in frightening detail about how they were abducted and then probed by aliens back in 1976. They stated that they were approached by a gray, long neck entity with large, bald eyes, metallic, lifeless eyes, and four skeletal fingers. Experiences such as collecting bodily fluids and tissues were also taken along with silvery tools such as needles and other devices were probing each of them. So the witnesses stated that the pain was excruciating. And this entity told them not to be afraid. But if I were you, I would be mortified having things extracted from me, seeing needles everywhere, being completely naked, sitting, laying down on a metallic table. Uh, I would be scared, very scared. Wouldn't you? I mean, it's like they were treated like a mindless lab rat. But these are people. Charlie described the ship as like a doctor's office. He claimed that they put a panel over his chest and scaped skin from his body. Finally, Chuck claimed that he had a good view of what the aliens were doing to Charlie, and the device that the aliens used was silver and had curves. To him, it appeared that Charlie was in pain. After the session, Ray, the UFO researcher, brought the four men together. They learned that each of them recalled the exact same event, and they even took polygraph examinations and passed. A little bit later, a book was released regarding this whole case, which, again, in this situation, I do not blame them. If you want to share your experience, go ahead and do that, because maybe other people might have the same encounter and they need a resource to kind of lean towards, right? And feel a little bit more safe. But after all of these men had told their encounter, had passed these polygraph tests, there was one black sheep in the group who stated, nope, everything was fake, nothing actually happened. And that was Charles Rack. And he stated, while we did see a UFO, like we saw light the night that we were out on the lake, we weren't actually abducted. No, we weren't actually probed. None of that happened. And that kind of muddied the water for everybody else in that group. Was he telling the truth? Was he not? Well, it was stated by the other men, stating that the reason to why Rack was saying these things was because he wanted to make money off this encounter. But the other men were like, no, we just want to tell our story, and that's it. But Rack wasn't having it. So he wanted to take everyone down with him. And he says, well, look, if we're not going to make money, then this story didn't actually happen. Now, is that true? We simply do not know. But it is a incredibly compelling UFO encounter. All of these are incredibly compelling UFO encounters. Out of all of the ones that we covered, which one was your favorite? If you know me, my favorite one is the Colares Brazil case. Nothing can beat that one so far. I'm still doing research, so that might change in the near future, but currently that is my all-time favorite case. But what about yourself? Out of all the ones that we covered, which one do you like? Let me know in the live chat. Let me know in the comments as well. Stargazer says, Allagash. That is a good one. Chris, I like it. The Brazil case, there you go. It's the best one, in my opinion. I should make that very clear. Because it's scary. Would I want to encounter something like that or like any of these? Without my camera and notebook, probably not, especially during that time period. But if it were today, I probably still wouldn't want to encounter these types of situations because they are scary. They are pretty scary. For those that are new, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell as the notification bell, because there will be another show coming out on Thursday on Mysteries with the History at 2:30 p.m. PST with my co-host Jimmy Church of Fada Black Radio, and on Friday will be Weekly Strange News at 3 p.m. PST. So we're always doing shows here on this channel, so make sure to subscribe so that you never miss a show. Also, follow me on Twitter at eyes_on_the_skies to keep up with my updates and news. But if you need help relaxing, need help focusing when you're doing your work or doing your studies, or even if you want to meditate, check out my music channel at Cosmic Portals. There you can find some really fantastic music that will just overall help you relax or even help you focus as well. E Bravo, thank you so much. It says great content, learn something new. Brazil case has to be the wildest. I'm with you on that one. Thank you so much for the super chat. Zenza says, I'd go Maury Island too. Nice. It's a good case. I do like that case very much. Well, that is it for today's show. I will see you on Thursday. Be safe and remember, keep your eyes on the skies.